Claire Hudson woke early that morning with a calm smile. The sunlight came through the white curtains, falling softly on the bed where she once thought real happiness lived. It was her 10th wedding anniversary. She wanted the day to be simple and beautiful. She placed white roses in a glass vase, made pancakes that Ethan used to like, and even put his favorite tie on the dresser for him. She thought it would please him. He had been distant in the past few months, but she believed that love had quiet seasons, and today might bring them closer again. She still remembered the day he had proposed by the river with shaky hands and honest eyes. She kept believing that man was still inside him somewhere. When Ethan's parents offered to host a small dinner to celebrate the occasion, Claire had been touched. She picked a cream dress, gentle makeup, and a simple necklace Ethan bought her on their first anniversary. She rehearsed a short toast in her head as she prepared the table settings. She planned to thank everyone and remind Ethan that 10 years of shared life meant more than any gift. She wanted to make everyone proud that she had loved as deeply as she had promised to. By noon, the house looked perfect. Plates gleamed, candles waited to be lit, and the smell of baked bread filled the air. Claire looked at the clock and smiled as she heard cars pull into the driveway. She wiped her hands and went to the door expecting the familiar loving noise of a family gathering. She imagined Ethan's mother bringing a large pie as she always did, and his father wearing the same hat he wore to every holiday. She opened the door and smiled. Her mother-in-law did come first, but there was someone new beside her. It was a young woman with soft curls and bright eyes, holding a box of expensive chocolates. Ethan followed behind them with an unreadable face. "Claire, this is Lila," his mother said cheerfully. "It's so wonderful of you to host this celebration for her." The words hit Claire like a cold wind. For her, she turned slightly to see if she had heard right, but everyone was smiling as if nothing was strange. Inside the living room, Claire noticed something that made her chest tighten. The decorations were not the ones she had arranged the night before. Pink ribbons covered the corners, and on the main table stood a large cake with golden writing. It read "To Everlasting Love, Ethan and Lila." Her own name was nowhere to be seen. The air in the room changed. It was still warm, still filled with voices, but it no longer belonged to her. Ethan's father raised his glass and said, "A toast to the woman who brings life and joy back into our son's days." The guests clapped and cheered for Lila. Claire's hands trembled slightly, but she hid them behind her back. Her heart felt numb. She smiled softly as though she didn't notice the mistake, though her body wanted to flee. Ethan stood beside Lila, looking down at her with quiet affection. He didn't try to explain or defend. He didn't even meet Claire's eyes. Her mother-in-law turned to Claire with false sweetness. "You must be so proud of Ethan's happiness." Claire's voice stuck in her throat, but she managed to whisper, "Yes, he deserves happiness." It was a lie made to survive the moment. Guests continued to laugh and talk, while Claire served them food with frozen politeness. Every fork she placed on the table felt heavier than the last. She heard pieces of conversation about how perfect Lila and Ethan looked together, how love always finds its way. Each sentence pressed against her chest like a sharp stone. Still, she did not cry. She smiled in silence, her eyes calm, her movements graceful. No one could see the storm behind her stillness. Later, when she handed a slice of cake to Lila, their eyes met for a moment. Lila seemed unsure, almost guilty, but said nothing. Claire's voice came out quiet and steady. "It's very pretty," she said. "I hope it tastes as good as it looks." Then she turned away, carrying an empty plate that suddenly felt as heavy as her years of marriage. After the dinner, when the guests began to leave, Claire walked to the garden where she could breathe again. The cold night air felt cleaner than the warmth inside the house. She looked up at the sky and tried to remember when she had stopped noticing the stars. Behind her, she could still hear laughter from the dining room, but it sounded far away, like echoes from a life that no longer belonged to her. She straightened her spine, smoothed her dress, and whispered to herself, "This is not the end." Claire woke up the next morning, feeling as if her whole body had turned to stone. The sunlight entering the room seemed dull and cold. The bed beside her was empty. Ethan had already gone to work, leaving no note, no message, not even a sign that he remembered the day before. The silence in the house felt heavier than the laughter from the night before. She sat on the edge of the bed and tried to piece together what had happened at the dinner. Every smile, every toast, every careless cheer for Lila played again in her mind. She had felt like a guest at her own anniversary, watching her life being handed away. She went to the kitchen and made herself tea. The cup shook slightly in her hand. She remembered how Ethan used to hug her from behind while she cooked. Now, the space behind her was empty and still.
Oh.
Her fingers touched the ring on her hand. She had believed that it meant forever. No, it felt like a mark of ignorance, a promise that only one of them had kept. When the doorbell rang, she wiped her eyes quickly and opened the door. It was her mother-in-law, Donna, smiling as if nothing strange had happened. "I thought I'd stop by," Donna said cheerfully. "We had such a lovely evening yesterday. Leela fits right in with the family, doesn't she?" Claire forced a small curve of a smile. "Yes," she said quietly, "she does." Donna walked inside and began to talk about Ethan and Leela's future. She spoke of trips they might take and how happy Ethan seemed now that he had found peace. Claire listened without a word. Her heart was pounding, but her face stayed calm. Donna patted her hand kindly, saying, "You have always been good to him. I know you understand that love can change. You are strong enough to accept it." When the older woman left, the house felt emptier than before. Claire walked into her small studio at the back of the house. It was where she painted to quiet her thoughts. The smell of turpentine lingered in the air, and the canvas on the easel stood half-finished. She sat on the stool and picked up a brush. Her hands trembled at first, but then the strokes became steady. She painted two figures standing close to each other, their hands almost touching but not quite. Between them she painted a faint red line. It glowed under the light, thin but unbroken. It was what she imagined a soul string might look like, invisible but real. For the first time since the dinner, she began to breathe normally again. When Ethan came home that evening, the house was quiet. He dropped his keys on the table and hesitated when he saw Claire in the studio. "You didn't have to do all that last night," he said awkwardly. "Everyone just wanted to be friendly." Claire turned to look at him. Her eyes were calm but distant. "Friendly," she repeated softly. "Is that what we call betrayal now?" Ethan flinched a little. "It's complicated," he said. "You and I have drifted apart. Leela understands me in ways you don't." His words came out rehearsed, and even he seemed unsure of them. Claire set down the brush and walked to him. "You had the choice to talk to me," she said. "You had the choice to try. But you chose silence." Ethan looked away. "I didn't want to hurt you." Claire gave a short, quiet laugh that wasn't happy. "Then you should have thought before bringing her into my home. Before letting your mother call her the one who makes you happiest." He said nothing. The silence stretched like a wall between them. After a moment, she stepped back. "You don't owe me an explanation anymore," she said. "But you do owe me honesty. Was she already in your life when you promised me another chance last month?" Ethan's eyes flickered, and the answer was in his face even before he spoke. Claire nodded slowly. "Thank you for confirming what I already knew." That night, when he went to sleep on the couch, Claire stood in front of the long mirror by the window. She looked at her reflection and thought about who she had become. She was not the soft, hopeful woman who had waited by the door with roses. She felt like something had cracked inside her, but behind that break was a strange strength. She could almost taste it, like the first breath after deep water. In the morning, she packed a small bag and took a walk to the park near the lake. The air was cool and smelled of new rain. She sat on a bench and watched two children feed bread to ducks. Claire returned home from her walk with a strange calm inside her. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. Ethan was gone again, maybe at work or with Lila. She did not ask and did not wish to know. The kitchen table still had the same vase of roses from the anniversary dinner, but the petals had turned brown and dry. She picked one up and held it between her fingers. It crumbled into dust. She watched the small pieces fall to the floor, peaceful and slow, and thought that this was how some loves ended. Not with a bang, but with quiet decay that no one noticed until it was gone. She opened the windows and let fresh air in. The curtains lifted, and the scent of rain mixed with the smell of paint from her studio. She walked into that room like she was stepping into a safe world. The canvas still showed the two figures she had painted. She stood before it for a long moment, studying the faint red line between them. It looked fragile, but something in it seemed alive. She whispered to herself that broken things did not mean worthless things. She stretched the canvas tighter, cleaned her brushes, and began to paint again. As the hours passed, the painting changed. The background turned from pale gray to deep blue. One of the figures started to fade into the color while the other grew brighter, carrying the red line alone. Claire's hand moved slower now, more careful, more certain. She was no longer painting about loss, but about return. Not to Ethan, but to herself. Every color she added felt like a piece of her heart coming back together. When she stopped, her hands were stained. Her cheeks had streaks of red paint, and her heart felt quiet but alive. She looked at the work and smiled. It was not finished, but it was breathing. Late that evening, she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, Donna stood outside again, holding a tray of food. "You look tired," Donna said. "You should eat something." "I made chicken soup." Claire thanked her politely and took the tray. Donna walked around the living room and looked at the wilted roses. Her lips curved into a small sigh. "Ethan tells me you have been painting more," she said. "It is good you are keeping busy. These things take time to accept." Claire placed the soup bowl on the table and looked straight at her mother-in-law. "What things exactly are you hoping I will accept?" she asked calmly. "That my husband has found a new life while I am expected to disappear quietly." Donna shifted uncomfortably. "It is not meant to sound cruel. You know how men can be. Maybe if you tried to understand, maybe even forgive, we could all move forward." Claire felt no anger this time, only pity. "You think forgiveness will return peace?" she said softly. "But peace is not found by pretending nothing happened." Donna stared at her for a moment and then nodded slowly, perhaps realizing for the first time that Claire was not broken. Without saying much more, she left. The door clicked softly behind her. Claire stood there for a while, holding the handle, feeling the strength of small choices. She had learned that speaking truth did not always change others, but it did change her. The next day, Claire visited an art supply store downtown. The owner, a kind, elderly man named Samuel, greeted her warmly. He had known her for years. "You look different, Claire," he said while packing her paints. "Something about your eyes has changed." She smiled lightly. "Maybe they are clearer now," she replied. He chuckled and handed her the receipt. "Clear eyes make good art. Keep painting." On her way home, she walked by the small art gallery near the city square. Inside, a new exhibition was being set up. She paused at the window and saw a sign asking for local artists to submit works for the next month's showcase. She felt her heart steady itself against her ribs. The idea came quietly into her mind. Perhaps her painting could speak louder than any words she could ever say, not as revenge, but as truth. A truth carved in color for all to see. That night she stood in her studio again. She looked at the painting and then at the empty canvas leaning against the wall. She took a deep breath and pulled the blank one into the light. This time, she wanted something bolder. She wanted to show not just the pain, but the rebirth after it. She drew with slow care, shaping a figure standing alone but strong, surrounded by glowing strands of red. Each stroke carried meaning, each color a little victory. Hours passed and she worked without noticing time moving. When the first morning light touched the painting, Claire stepped back. Her eyes were tired but bright. She felt something deep in her chest, not joy, not sadness, something new and full of power. She looked out the window at the soft dawn and whispered, "Not broken, just redrawn." She smiled as she cleaned her brushes. The house was still silent, but now the silence felt different. Like the space before a new beginning rather than the echo after an ending. The morning of the gallery event arrived with gray clouds and a soft wind that shook the autumn leaves. Claire woke early. She stood in front of her mirror and tied her hair back. Her hands were steady. The dress she chose was plain and white, the color of a clean page. On the table by the door stood the painting she had worked on for weeks. It was ready. She ran her fingers across its edge as if saying goodbye to a dear friend before carrying it outside to her car. The world around her looked quiet, but inside she felt strong currents moving. When she reached the city, the gallery was already busy with workers, preparing lights and stands. The owner, a cheerful woman named Grace, greeted her warmly. "Claire Hudson, I have heard so much about your work. The colors you use are full of feeling," Grace said with surprise and respect. Claire smiled politely and followed her inside. The gallery walls gleamed white. The air carried the faint smell of paint and flowers. Claire gave her painting to the assistants who hung it in the center hall. It was titled "The Red String of Silence." When the lights fell on it, the painting seemed to breathe. Two figures stood apart, one fading into smoke and another rising with bright red threads circling like living veins. People passing by stopped and stared. Claire watched from a quiet corner, her arms folded. Her heart beat slowly as she listened to whispers. "It looks like sorrow turning into light," one man said. Another woman added softly, "It feels like someone has turned pain into power." As the crowd gathered, Ethan arrived with Lila beside him. Claire saw them before they saw her. Ethan wore the same proud, careless look he carried during the dinner weeks ago. Lila's expression was uncertain, her hand clinging to Ethan's arm. Claire stayed still. Grace walked over to greet them. "Welcome, Mr. Hudson," she said. "Your wife's work has become the heart of our exhibit." Ethan blinked. "My wife," he said lightly. "Yes," Grace replied without thought. "Claire Hudson, of course. Her painting is already getting attention from collectors." Ethan froze slightly. He turned and saw the title plaque beside the painting that bore their name. For a long second, he stared at it. The truth seeped slowly into his face as he looked at the image. The two figures, the red string, the smoke. His lips parted, but no words came. Lila looked too, her mouth tightening. Some guests nearby had begun reading the small card below the painting where Claire had written a short note. "From silence, we speak again. From loss, we rebuild." The room shifted. People began to understand that the story behind this painting was not just one of imagination. It was real, standing in front of them in the shape of a calm woman dressed in white. Claire walked forward, her movements quiet and graceful. When she reached the painting, people stepped aside respectfully. She stood a few feet away from Ethan and Lila. Her voice was soft but clear. "This painting belongs to the truth," she said. "Not to anger, not to shame, just truth." Ethan tried to speak, but she raised her hand gently. "You do not have to explain," she said. "You already have, by your choices." The crowd kept silent, watching as if the air itself had stopped. Claire turned her eyes back to the painting. "When hearts are tied by lies, the strings burn out," she said. "When they are tied by honesty, they glow." She then thanked Grace for the opportunity, bowed her head slightly, and walked toward the exit. The sound of her steps against the marble floor echoed through the gallery like a slow beat of a drum. Outside, the wind had grown stronger. The first drops of rain began to fall. Claire lifted her face and closed her eyes for a second, letting the cool rain touch her skin. Inside, people continued whispering about her art, and her calm strength. Ethan stood staring at the painting even as others began to crowd around him, asking questions he could not answer. Claire walked to the end of the street where the cars passed quietly. The city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. She took a slow breath. She had not planned revenge that night, only truth. What she had done was not to expose Ethan, but to free herself from the weight of silence. She felt light. The ring that had once pressed against her finger no longer mattered. As she stood there under the rain, a young woman approached her and introduced herself as an art critic. "Your painting touched me deeply," she said. "There is sadness in it, but also hope." "What will you paint next?" Claire thought for a moment, and then answered gently. Claire looked one last time at the building behind her. The lights glowed warm through the windows. She could still see the painting hanging at the center, shining under its lamps. She turned away with a steady heart and walked down the street, with the sound of rain trailing behind her. The night that had started in gray clouds ended with a soft glow. Claire finally felt herself moving forward, free, her soul string no longer bound by sorrow, but by strength. A month passed after the night of the exhibition. The city had started to speak her name with quiet admiration. Claire Hudson, the painter who had turned heartache into beauty, had become a story people repeated with respect. Newspapers wrote about her art, and pictures of the red string of silence appeared on pages with gentle praise. People said her work was different because it told truth without anger. Claire read some of the articles but did not let them fill her heart too much. She was grateful but calm. The story of her pain no longer hurt. It had become something else, something she had shaped with her own hands. Each morning she woke early, opened the windows, and let the sun touch her studio walls. The air smelled of new paint and morning dew. She worked quietly, painting small pieces that showed hope instead of sorrow. One painting showed a single bird flying across an open sky. Another showed two hands opening to release a thread of light. She felt peace when she painted them. The brush did not tremble anymore. Her heart moved steady and sure, like a rhythm she finally understood. Ethan had not come to see her since the gallery night. He had tried to call twice, but she had not answered. There was nothing left to say. Each call that went unanswered was another layer of freedom settling on her shoulders. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with the silence he had given her. Lila's name faded from talk as quickly as it had come. Claire did not wish her ill. In her new peace, she felt no need to hate. The world had taught her that hate still tied her to what she no longer wanted. She chose release instead. One afternoon, as she cleaned her brushes, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, she found Ethan standing there. His eyes looked tired, his hair slightly unkempt, and his confident smile was gone. He held his hat in his hands and spoke quietly. "Look well, Claire," he said. She nodded. "I am well." For a moment, they both stood in silence. The sound of leaves moving outside filled the gap between them. "I saw your painting again," he said. "It is still on display at the gallery. People stop and stare at it for a long time." Claire gave a small, polite smile. "I am glad it speaks to them," she said. Ethan looked down, then back at her. "I did not know how strong you were. I thought you would always wait for me." She tilted her head slightly. "You mistook kindness for weakness," she said. "They are not the same." He nodded slowly. "You are right," he answered. "I am sorry." Claire looked past him to the open sky. "You already said enough when you chose another woman at our table," she said. "I do not need more words. What matters is what comes after." He looked as if he wanted to say something else, but she stepped aside and pointed softly toward the road. "We both have paths to walk now," she said. "Mine is forward." He gave a slow nod, turned away, and walked down the street until he faded from sight. Claire watched him go with no anger in her heart, only a quiet gratefulness that she had found the courage to end what no longer served her soul. That evening, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea. The sky was wide and golden. Cool wind passed through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. She closed her eyes and felt the peace of being alone but not lonely. Inside, her phone rang. It was Grace, the gallery owner, calling to invite her for another exhibition. "Your next set of works deserves the front wall," Grace said with excitement. Claire smiled and promised to visit the next day. When she went to the gallery again, her steps were light. Grace showed her the space and said, "People are waiting to see what your heart will paint next." Claire looked around and imagined her new pieces on the walls. "Then they will see life," she said calmly. "It's not sorrow, not revenge, just life." Grace nodded with delight. That night, Claire began a new painting. The canvas showed a wide field beneath an open sky with one figure walking toward the horizon. The red thread appeared again, bright but gentle, leading forward instead of backward. It no longer tied to broken hearts, but one soul to a future full of peace. She painted until midnight, her strokes slow and sure. When she finished, she sat back and watched her new work shine under the lamp. The story had come full circle. She felt complete. Outside, the stars were bright and near. The house was quiet, but inside the quiet grew warmth, not emptiness. Claire lay down to rest with a faint smile on her face. She had learned that endings could serve as beginnings, and that sometimes love was not about holding on, but knowing when to let go. Her heart had found its own rhythm again, strong and calm. The red string, once tangled in sorrow, now guided her forward toward a life she finally owned.